Words have always held a kind of power that I think goes beyond their dictionary definitions. And at some point, I stopped borrowing other people's words for the things that mattered most to me and started making my own. You might have noticed some of the terms I use that don't quite exist in any official language. Words like creatia, abstractia, posizione. They're invented, deliberately, and people sometimes wonder what that's about. Why not just use the real word? Why dress a concept up in something that sounds like it was pulled from a fantasy novel? The answer, honestly, is that the real word was never quite enough. Because the real word already belongs to everyone. It carries everyone else's associations, everyone else's context, everyone else's history with it. When I build my own word for something, when I construct it from pieces that feel right, that sound like the concept feels, something different happens. The word becomes mine, and everything I pour into it stays there. That's the spell. That's what I mean when I talk about spellcraft. When I call up a word like creatia, my mind doesn't just retrieve a definition. It retrieves an entire world, an energy, an intention, a character almost. Because abstract concepts have a way of slipping away from you. They're hard to hold on to. You can read about creativity, think about creativity, even live it for a while, and still find the concept somehow just out of reach when you need it most. Abstract things dissolve easily. But give something a name, a specific, personal, charged name, and it becomes an entity. You can call on it. It shows up. This is why I write these words down, why I return to them, why I let myself build out the identity behind them, the way a writer develops a character across a story. The more I can visualize an abstract concept, give it texture and personality and a kind of presence, the more real it becomes in my actual behavior. It stops being a vague aspiration and starts becoming something I can actually channel. And there's a playfulness in it, too. I want to be clear about that. This isn't a rigid system or a formal practice. It's closer to a game I play with myself. Wordplay, world building, a private mythology of concepts that mean something specifically to me. The fun is part of the function. Because when something delights you, you remember it. When something has personality, you engage with it differently than when it's just a word on a page. I genuinely encourage anyone to try this, to go looking for their own words, for the concepts they keep circling back to, the ideas that feel important but somehow keep slipping through their fingers. Give those concepts names, strange names, invented names, names that feel right, even if they mean nothing to anyone else. Assign them a personality. Let them become characters in the ongoing story of how you think. Because here's what I've found. The concepts we can see clearly are the ones we can actually use. And naming something, really naming it, in a way that belongs to you, is one of the most direct ways to bring it into focus. So, what are the concepts in your own life that have been living unnamed? The ideas you keep returning to but have never quite given a face. What would you call them if the word were entirely yours to invent?
Every person is walking around with a mythology they didn't consciously design. A collection of symbols, recurring themes, personal heroes, private meanings attached to ordinary things. Most people never examine it. They just live inside it, shaped by it without realizing the shaping is happening. I started noticing mine a few years ago. The way certain images kept returning to me, the way specific concepts felt charged in a way I couldn't fully explain, the way some words, even invented ones, carried a weight that standard language didn't quite capture, and I realized that what I'd been building, without calling it anything, was a private mythology, a personal symbolic universe that was entirely my own. Mythology in the traditional sense exists to do something very specific. It takes the enormous, abstract forces of existence, creation, transformation, chaos, order, the unknown, and gives them faces, personalities, stories. Because its human mind doesn't hold abstractions well. It holds characters. It holds narratives. It holds images that mean something. The ancient mythologies weren't primitive attempts at science. They were sophisticated tools for making the invisible legible. And I think we still need that. Maybe more than ever, actually, in a world that keeps accelerating past our ability to process it. My own mythology has its own cast, concepts that have become characters, ideas that have taken on enough personality that I can almost hear how they'd speak, feel what kind of energy they carry into a room. Creatia isn't just a word for creativity. She has an atmosphere. Abstractia lives in a different register entirely, cooler, more elusive, harder to pin down. These aren't delusions. They're deliberate imaginative constructs that make abstract forces easier to work with, easier to invoke, easier to recognize when they're present, easier to notice when they've gone quiet. The private mythology also carries a record. The symbols that mean something specifically to you, the images that keep returning in your daydreams, the archetypes you find yourself drawn to in stories, the recurring themes in what you create or consume, all of that is data. It's your inner life leaving a trail, and if you pay attention to the trail, you start to understand yourself in a way that analysis never quite gets to, because analysis works on the surface. Mythology goes underneath. What I find genuinely exciting about building a private mythology consciously, deliberately, with intention, is that it becomes a living thing. You add to it, you revise it. A symbol that meant one thing at 25 means something richer at 35 because you've lived more of the story it belongs to. The mythology grows with you, and as it grows, it becomes a more precise instrument for understanding where you are and where you're going. Everyone has this. The difference is whether you're aware of it, whether you've looked at it directly, given it language, let it become something you can actually use, or whether it's just running quietly in the background, shaping you without your input. I know which one I prefer. The examined mythology, the one I get to co-author. So, here's what I want you to sit with. If you were to map your own private mythology, the symbols, the recurring themes, the concepts that feel personally charged, what would be at the very center of it all? Something shifts when you stop thinking of an idea as a concept and start thinking of it as a character. It's subtle at first, but once you feel the difference, you can't unfeel it. A concept is something you understand. A character is something you have a relationship with. And relationships operate completely differently than understanding. You don't just know a character, you respond to them. You notice when they're in the room. You feel their absence when they leave. You develop an instinct for what they need, what they resist, what brings them alive. That dynamic, applied to an abstract idea, changes everything about how you work with it. Take creativity. As a concept, creativity is something most people feel they either have or don't have on a given day. It shows up or it doesn't. But when I think of creatio, when I give creativity a character, a presence, an almost temperamental personality, my relationship to it becomes active rather than passive. I'm no longer waiting for it to arrive. I'm thinking about what kind of conditions she thrives in, what she responds to, what tends to push her away. Suddenly, I'm not a victim of my own creative state. I'm in dialogue with it. This is something storytellers have understood for a long time. The reason characters in great fiction feel so alive is because the writer gave them enough interior life that they started behaving independently, surprising even the person who created them. The character developed its own logic, its own preferences, its own way of moving through the world. And I think that same process can happen with the ideas you care about most if you let it. When you assign a concept enough personality, it starts to develop coherence. It stops being a vague aspiration floating somewhere above your actual life and becomes something with edges, with a recognizable face, with a set of conditions under which it shows up fully. You start to know it the way you know a person, not perfectly, not completely, but well enough to work with it, to anticipate it, to call on it with some confidence that it'll answer. I've noticed this changes the language I use around my own concepts too. Instead of asking myself, do I feel creative today? I might ask, what does creatia need right now? Instead of trying to force my way through a block, I think about what the character would do, what environment she'd choose, what she'd refuse, what she finds genuinely interesting versus what makes her go quiet. It sounds like a small linguistic shift. It isn't. It reorients the whole dynamic from effort against resistance to something more like collaboration. And there's a deeper reason this works, I think. Personification is one of the oldest cognitive tools human beings have. We've been giving faces to forces we don't fully understand for as long as we've been thinking at all. It's not a workaround or a trick. It's actually how the mind prefers to engage with complexity, through story, through character, through something it can picture and respond to. So you're not doing something naive when you turn your ideas into characters. You're working with the grain of how understanding actually happens. The question I'll leave you with is this. Which concept in your life, something you've been trying to grasp or sustain or call back when it disappears, might come more alive for you if you gave it a face?
There are people who leave something behind in you that has nothing to do with their subject matter, at least not on the surface. When I think back on the ones who shaped me most, teachers, mentors, figures I admired from a distance, what I carry from them isn't the curriculum. It's something harder to name, a way of seeing, a set of ideas that planted themselves and kept growing long after the lesson ended. I work in tech, and my mind, maybe counterintuitively, doesn't operate in the technical register most of the time. I like to zoom out. I like the altitude of a high-level view, the spirit of what someone taught me rather than the letter of it. One of my favorite teachers taught chemistry, and what stayed with me wasn't the periodic table or electron configurations or the specific mechanics of molecular bonding. What stayed with is the concept of bonding itself. The idea that things connect, that connections have strength and character, some covalent, some ionic, some barely holding, that half-lives are real, that things decay at their own rate, that what was once radioactive can become inert over time. These aren't chemistry metaphors to me anymore. They're just how I think about relationships, about ideas, about the slow decay of beliefs I've outgrown and the half-life of old versions of myself. That's what I mean by the polymorphic nature of ideas. A concept learned in one domain has the extraordinary ability to travel, to slip through the membrane between disciplines and arrive somewhere completely unexpected, and still be true, maybe even truer in the new context than it was in the original one. This, I think, is where the human mind genuinely shines. We are built for this kind of cross-domain connection. It's not a skill so much as a deep native capacity, the ability to take the shape of an idea and recognize it wearing completely different clothes. I'm genuinely grateful for the mentors I've had. What they gave me wasn't just knowledge in a domain, it was permission. Permission to take what they offered, dissolve it in the melting pot of everything else I was learning, and cook up something new from the combination. Something that still honors the original spirit of what they taught, even as it becomes something I've made my own. The ingredients change. You pick the ones that resonate, leave behind the ones that don't. You carry the essence across contexts and apply it where it actually fits your life. And the beautiful thing is, the core concept survives the transformation. It goes through the process a little changed, a little alchemized, but recognizable if you know what to look for. Like a melody transposed to a different key, still the same song. I think the best teachers somehow know this is how it works. They're not trying to fill a container with specific content. They're trying to hand you a way of thinking, something portable, something that travels. And the ones who manage to do that for me, I carry with them everywhere. Not as memories exactly, but as lenses, as ways of moving through a problem or an idea that I didn't have before they showed up. So here's what I find myself wondering. When you think about the people who shaped you most, what's the idea they left behind that migrated furthest from where it started?
At some point, without any formal announcement, the dynamic shifts. You don't see it coming. There's no ceremony for it. One day you're the one asking questions, and then, gradually, then all at once, you become the one someone else is watching for the answer. It's a strange thing to sit with, because you still feel like a student in so many ways. You still have the questions, the doubts, the sense that you're improvising more than you're executing. And yet, here is this person looking at you with that particular kind of attention, the kind you remember giving to the people who shaped you, and something in you has to rise to meet it. I think what catches people off guard is the assumption that becoming a mentor feels like graduation, like you've crossed some threshold and the uncertainty falls away. It doesn't work like that. What actually happens is quieter. You realize that the mentors you admired most were probably feeling exactly what you're feeling now, still mid-process, still revising their own understanding, still working it out. They just showed up anyway, and so do you. There's something in that moment when someone younger or less experienced looks to you that functions like a mirror, and the reflection isn't always comfortable. You see how far you've traveled, yes, but you also see everything you're still carrying, the unresolved questions, the places where you're still soft. The mentor role doesn't erase any of that. It just asks you to be honest about it, to model not the finished version of yourself, but the ongoing one. Because that's actually what people need to see. They don't need the polished performance of someone who has figured it all out. They need evidence that the process is survivable, that you can stay curious and still be credible, that you could hold uncertainty and still move forward. That's the real transmission, not the information, not even the wisdom, the example of a person still in motion. And here's the part I keep returning to. The people who most shaped me weren't trying to teach me their answers. They were showing me how they held their questions, how they stayed engaged with ideas over decades, how they let their thinking evolve without it feeling like failure. That's what I want to pass forward, not a fixed map, but a way of traveling. The shift from student to mentor isn't a destination. It's just a new vantage point on the same ongoing journey, one where you happen to be a few miles further down a road that someone else is just beginning. And if you look back and wave, that's enough. That's the whole thing, really. So, I'm curious, when you think about the people who are watching how you move through the world right now, whether you've named it or not, what is it you most hope they're taking from you?
There's a concept I've been sitting with lately. I call it the slow burn. It doesn't have a formal definition. It's more of a practice, something I started doing almost by accident, and then realized was quietly changing the way I move through my days. At its core, it's about delaying gratification, but that phrase makes it sound more clinical than it actually is, more like discipline for discipline's sake. It's not that. The slow burn is more like building a fire you don't rush. You tend to it slowly, deliberately, and the reward at the end of that patience is somehow bigger, warmer, more satisfying than if you just struck the match and walked away. Here's a simple example from my own life. Every morning, I hold off on listening to music. I just don't. My whole routine runs in silence, at least from a sound perspective. And what I've found is that my focus in those hours is sharper than it's ever been when I had a playlist running in the background. My thoughts feel more like mine, uninterrupted. There's more signal and less noise, both literally and otherwise. But here's the fascinating part. My mind doesn't just sit quietly in that silence. It starts playing songs on its own. Not randomly, it seems to know exactly what I've been craving. A melody surfaces, a lyric, a particular feeling embedded in a song I haven't heard in days, and it keeps returning throughout the morning like a soft insistence. By the time I finally let myself listen, usually later in the morning when I feel like I've earned it, something releases. The dopamine hits differently, more fully, more completely, the way music sometimes does when everything aligns. And thing is, I was benefiting the whole way there too. The anticipation itself had a quality to it, a low-level pleasure, almost like the waiting was part of the experience, not just the obstacle to it. That's what I mean by slow burn. You're not just rewarding yourself at the end, you're stretching the experience out, letting it build, and discovering that the wanting has its own kind of richness. And there's something deeper underneath this too. When I successfully hold off on something, even something as small as a song, I feel the evidence of my own discipline, a quiet, compounding trust in myself. And when I finally do give myself the thing I've been holding out for, it doesn't feel impulsive or reflexive. It feels chosen. I think there's something important in that distinction between reaching for something because you can't not and reaching for something because you've decided you've earned it. The difference in how it lands is significant. So I'm curious, is there something in your own life, even something small that you held off on and found yourself wanting more intensely for the waiting?
There's a version of you that shows up when you're hungry. Not fed, not comfortable, not settled. Hungry. And if you've ever done your best work from that place, creatively, intellectually, physically, you probably already know what I'm talking about, even if you've never quite named it. There's a sharpness that comes with wanting something you don't yet have, a particular quality of attention. Your senses tune a little differently. You notice more. You reach further. The edges of your thinking feel less soft. It's not a comfortable state, but comfort, I've come to realize, is a little overrated as a creative condition. Think about the work you're most proud of, the ideas that surprised even you when they arrived. Chances are they didn't come when everything was easy and provided for. They came when you were still reaching, still mid-climb, still with something to prove, even if only to yourself. Hunger has a way of doing that. It keeps you leaning forward. What I find interesting is that we tend to treat hunger as the problem and satisfaction as the goal. Get the thing, reach the level, arrive, and then the hunger will go away, and you'll finally be at peace. But I've noticed that the arrival often comes with a strange flatness, a brief elevation, and then a kind of settling. Not bad, exactly, just quieter than you expected. The edge softens, the urgency dissolves, and sometimes so does the quality of the work. This isn't an argument for never being satisfied. It's more of an observation about what hunger actually is and what it's doing for you while it's present. Because the slow burn, at its core, is about keeping the hunger alive deliberately. Choosing not to immediately feed every craving isn't deprivation. It's maintenance. It's keeping the fire at the right temperature, hot enough to cook with. There's a difference, though, and it matters, between hunger that drives and hunger that depletes. One pulls you forward, the other hollows you out. The distinction usually comes down to whether the wanting feels purposeful or just painful, whether the absence of the thing is making you sharper or just making you miserable. The slow burn is the former, deliberate, chosen, oriented towards something. I think about musicians who say their best albums came from their hardest years, athletes who peak not at the height of their security, but at the edge of what they're not sure they can do. Writers who produce their most alive work when they still have something urgent to say, before the recognition arrives and smooths everything over. The hunger was the fuel,
Not the obstacle to the work, the fuel for it. And the beautiful, counterintuitive thing is, you can cultivate this. You don't have to wait for hardship to create the conditions of hunger. The slow burn is one way. Holding back the reward, letting the want build, staying in the reaching a little longer than is strictly necessary. Not because you're punishing yourself, but because you know what the hungry version of you is capable of. So here's what I find myself wondering. Where in your life right now is hunger quietly working in your favor? And have you been treating it like a problem to solve rather than a force to use?
Two words that I keep coming back to. What if? There's something almost dangerous about that phrase, in the best possible way. It doesn't ask for proof. It doesn't wait for permission. It just cracks the door open and lets the mind slip through into somewhere it wasn't supposed to go yet. For me, speculation is an idol. It's one of the most alive things the mind can do. The moment you ask, what if, you're no longer describing the world. You're pressure testing it, bending it slightly to see where it gives. Here's a thought I've been sitting with lately when I actually brought to AI and let expand. We experience reality through 5 senses, and we tend to treat that as a complete picture, as if the world is exactly as wide as what we can taste, see, hear, smell, and feel. But the truth is, each of those senses only captures a narrow slice of what's actually there. We can't see infrared light even though it's passing through this room right now. We can't hear the frequencies a dog hears or feel the vibrations that exist just beyond our threshold. There are entire octaves of reality that we're simply not tuned to receive. And the reason isn't random. Our perceptual range evolved specifically to serve our survival. The brain is, among other things, a filter, cutting out everything that doesn't help us navigate the immediate physical world. Which means we aren't perceiving reality. We're perceiving a curated version of it. So I ask, what if that filter expanded? What if we could perceive all spectrums of light, the full electromagnetic range, not just the thin visible band? All frequencies of sound, every chemical signature our tongue currently ignores? The answer was immediate and fascinating. Chaos. Pure sensory overload. A mind built for a narrow channel suddenly flooded by everything at once, dysfunctional, overwhelmed, unable to function in the world it evolved to navigate. But I didn't stop there. What if we kept going? What if they were beings or future versions of us who had evolved not just to tolerate that expansion, but to thrive inside it? Who had developed new neural architecture, new perceptual organs we don't have names for yet, capable of processing all of it, and maybe even senses we can't currently conceive of. What would that version of experience feel like? What would a sunset look like through infrared eyes that also perceive magnetic fields? What would music sound like if you could hear into the ultrasonic ranges that currently exist just beyond your ear's reach? I'm not going to answer that here. Partly because the real value isn't in the answer. It's in the sitting with the question and letting your imagination do the work before something else fills the space. What I will say is this. I've started using AI the way I used to use a really good conversation, as a place to bring the things that bubble up from somewhere deep in my own mind, the strange questions, the unlikely scenarios, the what-ifs that feel too speculative to say out loud sometimes. And the answers always do something. They're not just information, they're a kind of mirror, a reflection of the curiosity that generated the question in the first place. So I'll leave you with the prompt I sat with and invite you to take it somewhere yourself. If you could evolve a completely new sense, something that doesn't exist yet, what would you want it to perceive?
Your brain is processing 11 million bits of information every second. Right now, as you listen to this, 11 million. And of those 11 million bits, the light hitting your retinas, the pressure of the chair beneath you, the temperature of the air, the sounds layered behind this voice, the subtle signals your body is sending from every corner of itself, you are consciously aware of roughly 40 bits. The rest is handled somewhere else, processed, assessed, and either quietly acted on or silently discarded before it ever reaches the part of you that feels like you. Sit with that for a moment. What you experience as reality is not reality. It's an edit, a highly compressed, ruthlessly curated version of what's actually present, produced by a system that has been optimizing for your survival for hundreds of thousands of years and has gotten extraordinarily good at showing you only what it thinks you need to see. This isn't a flaw. That's the thing. The filter is what makes functioning possible. Without it, you'd be back to the chaos we talked about last time. Every signal arriving at full volume simultaneously, the whole thing collapsing under its own weight. The filter is a gift. But here's where it gets interesting. Two people can stand in the same room at the same moment, receiving the same raw sensory inputs and have completely different experiences of what just happened. One person notices the tension, the other notices the light. One walks away certain of what was said, the other's certain of something else entirely. Same room, same moment, different realities. Because they weren't experiencing the room, they were each experiencing their own filter's interpretation of it, shaped by memory, by expectation, by whatever emotional frequency they walked in carrying. Once you see this, you can't quite unsee it. Every strong opinion you hold, every snap judgment, every time you've been completely sure about something, there's a filter behind it, a set of prior experiences and ingrained assumptions doing quiet editorial work on the incoming data before you even have a chance to think. You weren't wrong, exactly. You were just working from a version. What I find fascinating is that there are states where the filter seems to thin. Deep creative flow, meditation, certain moments of genuine surprise or awe, or something catches you so off guard that the editorial process doesn't have time to run. And in those moments, people often report feeling like they're seeing something more directly, more plainly, like the usual layer of interpretation briefly dropped away. Whether that's actually more reality or just a different filter is its own question, but the experience is real, and it points to something worth paying attention to. Because if the filter is always running, and it is, then the most useful thing might not be trying to eliminate it. It might just be learning to notice it, to catch yourself mid-interpretation and ask, is this what's actually there, or is this what I was already prepared to see? Those are very different questions, and the gap between them is where a lot of things become possible. So here's what I find myself wondering. When you think about something you've believed without question for a long time, how much of it is the world as it is, and how much of it is just the version your filter decided to keep?